things that should be found that the settlers left behind that haven't been accounted for yet?
Well, yeah, it's just a matter of where, if they are still on land or whether they have been unhappily lost to erosion. We hope the former rather than the latter. But in addition to what are more ephemeral footprints of structures and the fort palisade, if it in fact resembles construction techniques that were used at Jamestown and other early 17th century Virginia settlements. Normally, there are pits that will leave a significant signature in the ground, which may be what some of the ground penetrating radar targets were. Burials, but at this point we'll take anything.
So the Holy Grail cannon was around here too somewhere, maybe? A cannon, cannonballs, military.
Yeah. Well, you would think there'd be a lot of military equipment, like early Jamestown. Both the first colony here and the first group of settlers at Jamestown were remarkably similar expeditions of all men and boys. Essentially military expeditions, so just as the excavations of Jamestown have found predominantly military artifacts around the fort, we would expect to find similar sort of artifact assemblage here, probably dominated by military equipment. And we're still hopeful. One contention is that the Science Center would not have been located far from the village. And if that's true, then this has been very frustrating because there's been a lot of digging all around what we now know as the Science Center. But if you think that the glass house at Jamestown is more than a mile away from James Fort, then that still gives us a lot of latitude here where the village may have been located. We need to look at where on the north end of the island in the 16th century you could have sheltered ships, not the deep water ocean-going vessels, but still finding a place where they could have sheltered the vessels that they brought in to the sound. And to do that, we talked to geologists because the landscape has changed dramatically at the north end of the island, not only because of erosion, but because the 16th century layer that we have found elsewhere that contains the European artifacts, in many cases buried under 2, 3, 4 feet of sand, which has accumulated since then, creating all sorts of different contours and topography, filled in what were ravines and creek heads. And so we really need to bring in some scientific consultants to help us get a better idea of what the north end of the island may have looked like in the 16th century, to see where potential settlement sites may have been located. Because we're not committed strictly to the Park Service property. We will go off of it if the evidence leads us there. We have discussed actually going up the Albemarle Sound, where some scholars think the 1587 colony relocated when they left Roanoke Island. So it's not just Roanoke Island that we're interested in, but any aspects of where the 1585 or 1587 colony went and what they did.
Last question: as far as the foundation goes, who supports the foundation? Where is it getting its support from?
Right. Well, it's a pretty, because it's new, it's just getting its development off the ground, and right now the funding for it has come from a pretty tightly knit family of those who are interested in the Raleigh settlements for a long time. Scholars and historians and archaeologists and people have been close to the work in the 90s and this work now. Obviously, we hope to expand and make our support much broader, and that's something that's actively going on now too, is to try and bring some professional development people into the picture so that we'll be able to undertake more substantial projects in the future.
This is just kind of a philosophical question. Jamestown gets a lot of play. It's the first permanent English settlement. What are we going to learn if we find Roanoke?
Well, Roanoke is the first step towards establishing Jamestown. There are many links between, especially the first colony in 1585, because that colony actually returned and left records of who they were there and their observations and their experience. And in many cases, the principals not only wrote about their experience, but they were also still around in 1607, and some of them clearly were consulted by the Virginia Company of London prior to launching its colonizing venture at Jamestown. And I think if you look at this as Jamestown was the Apollo mission, and this at Roanoke Island in the 1580s was the Gemini mission, and there were some exploratory voyages before that as sort of the Mercury mission. And I think that it really fits because what was learned here, especially in 1585, was applied to Jamestown. Not only did they explore, did the 1585 colony explore the Chesapeake Bay and the mouth of the James River, they also learned how much the Native Americans valued copper. And I think that's a very large story at Jamestown. They also, like the Jamestown colonists, were inquiring about a passage to China, looking for precious metals, as well as to establish a base to raid the Spanish treasure fleets, but also a settlement to blunt further Spanish expansion. And so this was just the first step 20 years before Jamestown, but I think it's all part of the same fabric, the same story.